Kia ora, welcome to Paws for Thought. We've got a real treat this week. The wonderful Jacqui Knight from the Monarch Butterfly Trust is joining us again. She was with us in the first episode to talk about how to cultivate and nurture monarch butterflies. She's back this week to advise us on how to grow a butterfly garden. What plants do you need to grow to attract and feed butterflies? But first, we're joined by Eliot Pryor from SAFE. He's here to talk about why we view the world as a hierarchy and why we place animals at the very bottom. That approach, to a large extent, is used to justify our poor treatment and the exploitation of animals. But are humans really superior to animals? Or should living beings on the planet be coexisting harmoniously rather than exploitatively? To discuss this more, I'm joined by my guest, Eliot Pryor. Kia ora, Eliot, welcome to the program.
G'day, thanks for having me.
We order our society by hierarchy, basically with white heterosexual males at the top and women, non-white people lower down, large animals, then small animals. But that's actually a completely artificial construct, isn't it?
Yeah, I think every society constructs the hierarchies depending on basically the values that we construct. So, it's not. There are hierarchies, I think, but you've got to be so careful when you're using them. So, for example, a single cell, obviously, it's at a certain level, whereas an elephant has a certain intelligence and is very complex. And so we've just got to be really careful with, not making judgments based on our own values. And
Aristotle, about 2,500 years ago, developed the idea of perfectionism in his writings. And strangely enough, of course, he, a Greek heterosexual male, was the embodiment of perfection. So that's actually where we've derived some of this from, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess so. There's definitely a historical context to where our values come from and why animals are regarded the way that they are. So I think Descartes I believe it was the 17th century in France, so he was a very important philosopher who had amazing ideas, but basically from that time he was justifying the use of animals, for example, in scientific experiments, so using vivisection, and for him he believed that animals were just machines. And his famous maxim was, "I think, therefore I am," and he valued intelligence above everything, and he thought that animals really weren't thinking, they were just reacting to stimuli. And so for him, he thought it was okay to operate on a dog without anaesthetic, and he would say, or the people that followed him believed that the cries of pain weren't really pain, they were just a reaction that animal had. Yeah.
So that's obviously another source of why we think it's okay to treat animals badly, but a different way of looking at it is what the philosopher Jeremy Bentham said. He said that the question is not can they reason, but can they suffer. And I mean, I wouldn't accept they can't reason anyway, but that puts a totally different way of looking at it if you think that it's immoral to experiment on or kill animals because they can suffer, as opposed to looking at their intelligence.
Definitely, yeah. So he was in the 19th century, and yeah, it's a beautiful quote, can they suffer? So, and it is replying to Descartes in a way, so instead of I think, therefore I am, he's saying it's not about whether they think or how clever they are, it's actually can they suffer, and if they suffer, then we have a responsibility to look after them or to not cause suffering for those animals. The 19th century was a really interesting time because it was a time when, for example, the slave trade was ended in Britain, and a lot of those same people involved with fighting the slave trade or slavery were actually involved in animal welfare, and animal welfare you can date modern animal welfare from that time. So the SPCA was in England was started at that time by William Wilberforce, who was one of the parliamentarians who stopped the slave trade. Yeah.
So you can see that as being interrelated, that people see that it wasn't only slaves that were being badly treated, but animals were being badly treated. And then I guess we came on to realise that it wasn't okay to discriminate against women and treat us badly, and also that it wasn't okay to treat homosexuals badly.
Yeah. I think it's a continuum. So if you look at slavery, for example, lots of the things about slavery is interrelated with the way that animals are treated nowadays. So black people in the 18th century, for example, in Brazil or in the Caribbean, so they were regarded like cattle. So they didn't have names, they were branded, they were regarded as lesser beings, and science of that time backed it up. So they tried to justify it by the shape of their skulls, or which today we think that's crazy. And then so as time progresses, there are these progressive movements. There's civil rights, there's the feminist movement. So especially in the 60s and 70s. So animal rights, what we call animal rights, is a very modern thing. It's from the 70s, and in a way, it's the younger brother or sister of these movements. It's looking at, for example, the environment in a different way and saying, okay, this isn't our property. We are the guardians of the environment. We're the guardians of animals. Actually, we have a responsibility to look after these things.
And probably it's even more acute that we have to develop different ways of looking at the planet because of climate change, because it's becoming pretty obvious we can't go on as we are.
We're being forced to.
So what would be different ways of looking at the world, perhaps a more cooperative, living together, rather than that humans are up here, animals are down here, and it's okay for us to exploit them? What's other ways that we could function?
I think in terms of equality, so for example, we have this idea of pets. I mean, this is an animal rights idea, is that pets implies ownership. So technically animals are just property in the law. So if we change that just slightly and just look at them as our companions, so these are animals we love, and they love us back, we believe. And actually, they're not just property, they have feelings, and there's emotions and personality, as much as any person sometimes. And actually, it's in that sense, it's equality. It's not equality in ability. Sometimes it's not equality in rights, so we don't expect them to vote or anything, but it's equality in the sense of they have as much interest in living as we do. And so this is something we can see with the animals that we share our homes with. So expanding that a little more, and it's looking at farm animals, wild animals, animals used in experiments at the moment. So what is, if we are causing suffering, is it necessary? Asking that question.
And what about in law, legal rights for animals, a declaration of sentience in the law? Are those things that you hope to see in future?
Definitely, and it's something which is happening gradually around the world. So I think there's an understanding that animals are sentient now, so there's no problem with putting that into the law. But I guess there's implications which need to be worked out. So the way that we farm animals, for example, so we have these systems called factory farming. These systems were created in an environment where we did think that animals were machines. So there is a philosophy behind it. Nowadays, the philosophy has changed. Actually, animal behaviour is a science which is growing all the time. And suddenly we realise, hang on, these systems are wrong. It's not right that we can treat animals in this way. So that needs to change.
And we humans, we've actually got a very arrogant and blinkered view of the world and of other animals, because obviously we're actually animals as well, which I think we tend to forget. But I'm always bemused when I read in papers that scientists have done some experiment on dolphins or birds, and hey, they've found out that they're intelligent and they can, do this and that.
Crazy.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's partly if we admitted their intelligence and how many qualities they have, we wouldn't actually be able to keep treating them in the way that we do.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's a real conflict which is growing all the time in a way, because we have these systems which we're attached to, farming systems, animals and science, but also at the same time animal behaviour is this new amazing science where we are finding things out all the time. So cows have social structures and they have friends. Crows have a language, or that they can work out logically how to get food from something. There's all kinds of experiments happening with the cleverness of animals. They've just discovered that some fish that use tools. And the more that we find out more, actually it's a reflection on ourselves how little we know about animals. And the more that we find out, the more this conflict it's just going to grow between the animal welfare of farming, for example, factory farming, or other ways that we use animals in entertainment or for the economy, and actually how we value animals. So we have so much to learn from animals themselves.
And we've got a very human-centric view of the world. We think that we're the most important, or sometimes even that only we're important. And I mean, if I look at my life and my cat's life, my life's actually far more harmful to the planet because my carbon footprint is massive compared to my cat's. Yeah.
So maybe we're less evolved, do you think? Or
I think there could be an argument for that.
Cats are higher up.
I'm sure they'd say that. Thanks very much, Eliot.
Thank you.
Now it's time to talk about how you can attract butterflies to your garden by providing the right food for them. Most people know that you need to plant swan plant for monarch butterflies, but did you know that red admiral butterflies need stinging nettle? Now I'm joined by my guest Jacqui Knight from the Monarch Butterfly New Zealand Trust. Kia ora, Jacqui, welcome back to the program.
Good to be here.
Right, you're going to tell us what sort of plants people need to grow if they want to attract butterflies to their garden.
Yes, well, every butterfly or moth needs two types of plants. So all butterflies and moths need nectar as the adults. That's when they're flying. And every different butterfly or moth species requires a host plant, and they differ depending on which butterfly or moth you've got. So the monarch needs milkweed, or swan plant's a typical milkweed. Your admirals need stinging nettle. Coppers need Muehlenbeckia. So
quite a range. Okay, so I think most people probably know about swan plant for monarchs. So is it quite easy to grow your own swan plant?
Very easy to grow your own. And we suggest that people plant twice as many the first time that they plant them, and then they keep half of them covered over so that they won't get laid on. And at the end of that first year you'll have a huge big plant, and then you'll never need to buy more swan plants.
They also start self-seeding when you've had them for a couple of years, don't they? And so stinging nettle for red admirals. So
and yellow admirals.
I don't know how keen people are to have stinging nettle in their garden. It's actually hard to get hold of, isn't it?
It is. There are a few people that grow it, and we sell the seed. Jeff Davidson, he sells the seed. And once you've got it, you can plant it in an out-of-the-way part of the garden where nobody goes, or where you don't want people to go. And it's not such a bad plant, because if you get stung, you just rub a dock leaf on your sting and it's gone immediately.
And what's a host plant for coppers?
Muehlenbeckia, that's a native plant. Usually grows by the coast. Tiny little leaves. It looks like a sort of a wire wave mattress.
And would those be the three main types of butterflies that people could try and attract in New Zealand?
Probably blues would be another good one, and they're easy because we've got our host plant already. It's clover. So everyone's got clover in their garden, I think, and if not, there's always some clover growing beside the road.
And then the adult butterflies, you were saying they need nectar?
That's right, yes. And you need plants that will offer nectar all throughout the year. Even though it's midwinter here, I brought a few along, nectar varieties. Don't forget weeds. They're very important, for instance dandelion. But marigolds are very easy to grow. Once you've got them, you'll never be without them. And there's a couple of hebes in there as well. They give nectar, great nectar. And they're flowering at this time of the year. Some other ones in there as well. Daisies. Daisies make beautiful little landing platforms for butterflies.
So the butterflies need the nectar all year round?
Yes, that's right.
What happens to the butterflies in winter?
Depends on the species. Some of them overwinter as caterpillars, some overwinter as adults. The monarch, of course, it flies away in the autumn, and they gather together in huge overwintering colonies, and then they don't come back until the spring, and that's when they breed. But if you have a good patch of fine weather, in the middle of the winter, you'll find that they come back to top up their nectar reserves.
Yes, I remember last August they started appearing, and they were certainly laying again.
It's great to see them back, isn't it?
And whereabouts do they overwinter?
All sorts of places throughout New Zealand, usually golf courses or parks where there are large trees, and you can find them sometimes on the sunny side of the trees where they're out of the wind and getting maximum sunlight.
And lots of butterflies are threatened now because there's so many pesticides, we're intensifying build-up in cities and there's not much greenery left. So it's a really small thing people can do actually for conservation and to protect butterflies is to grow some plants in the garden.
Exactly. And sometimes it's not an expensive thing to do because you can get cuttings off Aunt Maud or gardening clubs are great at sharing plants, and it's usually the old-fashioned plants that are rich in nectar. That's a broad generalisation, but the people who develop new exciting plants that please us don't forget about the need for nectar for butterflies and bees.
So those new species are not really actually much good.
Not usually nectar rich.
Okay. And do butterflies like sunny conditions in your garden or shade or shelter?
Yes, sunny. They need shelter from the wind, so windbreak's important. Shelter from, maximum sunlight. It needs to be sunny, and they also need lots of different heights and levels.
Why is that?
Well, just for their flying, so that they can land on things that are different levels.
And what about if people use pesticides or poisons in their garden? Does that affect the butterflies or the
caterpillars? It does affect them. It's hard to give a standard rule, but we say the less pesticides the better. There are always other ways of having a butterfly-friendly garden. Most people come into butterfly gardening with the idea that they're going to get rid of all the bad things and just have the good things, and life's not like that at all. So you have to tolerate wasps, but then you try and reduce them, reduce the likelihood of having them. So you look for wasp nests and remove those. And you're going to have, if you have lots of swan plants, then you're going to have lots of aphids. They'll soon come. And if you don't do anything about them, then you'll have lots of ants and sooty mould and all the things that the ants will bring. So it's a matter of being vigilant and understanding those causes and effects, and doing something about it when you first notice it.
But not just wholesale trying to poison everything.
No. Yeah. What was it, 10 or 20 years ago, we'd go to the garden centre and get a spray, and we'd spray everything around the place, which was a really bad thing to be doing.
Because it can affect the butterflies as well.
Oh, it can, and all the good things about, the other things.
And how threatened are monarch butterfly populations in New Zealand?
I don't think they're threatened here at all, because it's the one country in the world where people go crazy every spring buying swan plants. So there's always going to be swan plants around for them. However, the migration in North America, this marvellous migration of all the monarchs, that is seriously under threat. And it's such a wonderful thing to do. It's such a great opportunity to learn about metamorphosis and migration and insect life and nature.
And can you tell us a bit about red admirals or yellow admirals as well? How common are they in New Zealand?
Well, in parts of New Zealand they're reasonably common. Like in Canterbury, there's a lot of stinging nettle growing wild, so you find they're pretty common down there. But in Auckland and Northland, it seems like we don't have much stinging nettle, only where people are actually deliberately growing it. And so you find them there.
So if you do plant it, as I did, they will come, will they? Or they might come?
They seem to be. It seems like they do come after a couple of years, but the best thing to do is to encourage other people to do it as well. And we're building up quite a little network of people. I've just come back from Northland and met two very keen people to see more admirals up there. So they're building up the network, and that's great to see. The red admiral is only found in New Zealand, Kahukura, and it's a beautiful butterfly, and it would be a shame to lose it.
So just a bit of stinging nettle in an out-of-the-way place, that could be your contribution perhaps to conservation.
Exactly.
And what about the coppers? Whereabouts in New Zealand are they found?
They found mostly on the coast or on riversides. So where Muhlenbecker grows, you find coppers.
Mm-hmm.
The blues are more likely pasture or overgrown lawns, and a great excuse not to mow the lawn.
Could justify it as attracting butterflies.
Exactly.
Yeah. And any other butterfly species that people might see?
There's some couple of day-flying moths. The cinnabar moth is rather beautiful, bright pink, and the magpie moth, it loves your cinerarias, and it's got the cutest little caterpillar too.
Oh, what does the caterpillar look
Oh,
like?
it looks fuzzy. It looks like a toy caterpillar actually. It's quite cute. They're often called woolly bears.
Oh, okay. And whereabouts in New Zealand are they found?
They're found most places in New Zealand, yes. Then you've got your beautiful moth that you don't see so much of, but the eucalyptus gum emperor moth, and on the puriri moth, that is stunning.
So there's quite a number of different ones people can look out for besides monarchs.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we'll wish everyone good gardening. Thanks a lot, Jacqui.
You're welcome.
A Bay of Plenty man charged with animal cruelty after black swans were allegedly mown down by a jet boat is also accused of filming a juvenile goat being thrown into the air and shot. The man faced 3 charges of ill treatment of animals when he appeared before a Tauranga community magistrate. Conservation scientists hope that a rediscovered seabird, the New Zealand storm petrel, can be nurtured on Little Barrier Island to the point where it stands a chance of survival. Until February this year, scientists had been unable to find a place where adult birds nested, despite exhaustive efforts. The breakthrough came when they tracked the birds from signals sent by tiny radio transmitters attached to the tails of adults captured at sea. We've all seen the pictures of the horrendous Indian floods in which many humans have perished. But what about the animals? People for Animals is mobilising with other animal groups to save as many animals as possible. Gori Muleki said that their first focus would be on trying to rescue 8,000 mules at Gorokund. A team would be airlifted in, taking vaccines and antibiotics and the small amount of food available. Local animal shelter and rescue workers in California are speaking out about their troubling experience with a Squaw Valley woman accused of neglecting dozens of animals. 61 animals were removed from the property. The disturbing conditions were initially reported in 2012, but no action was taken. People are being warned to check the conditions of rescued animals they plan to adopt to make sure they've been properly treated. Some leading international food companies have been carrying out cruel and unnecessary experiments on heavily pregnant animals to demonstrate the health benefits of their products, says the British Union for the Abolition of Vivisection. The organisation said that the experiments were being driven by a growing fascination with superfoods. One probiotic yogurt maker fed its product to animals through a steel tube before then forcibly feeding the animals a hydrochloric acid solution to damage their stomachs. The animals were then killed and dissected. Another company fed a diet aid to pregnant rabbits and then killed them just before they were due to give birth. Animal law enforcement officers have been roaming charred land in the Black Forest area of Colorado with buckets of water and fistfuls of carrots, trying to find animals displaced in the fires. One official said that all the animals were scared, already traumatised by the smoke and flames, and now reluctant to come when strangers tried to coax them. Hundreds of animals were left behind when humans were evacuated. Animal shelters in 29 Texas cities must explore ways and costs of dismantling their gas chambers under a new law. Shelters have until January 2014 to make the switch from euthanising animals by using either carbon monoxide gas or injections to use of injections only. Now, here are the 5 key points you need to know from this week's program. Animals are not inferior to humans simply because many of them are smaller than people. Many animals have complex brains. Seeing the world as a hierarchy with humans at the top helps to justify our poor treatment of animals. Animals feel pain, so it's unethical to let them suffer. Grow a butterfly garden by planting the flowers butterflies like. Plant stinging nettle to attract red admiral butterflies. That's our program for this week. Join us next week when we'll hear about the wonderful work of the Whangarei SPCA. They set up a clinic to de-sex and provide vet care for animals, and then opened an op shop to fund their work. We'll also hear about the review of the Animal Welfare Act and whether we can expect any real improvements from the new law. Thanks for watching. Ka kite anō.